Hello, I am Disbrew, and we start with Modern Warfare 2 has been confirmed for release in October. Earlier today, we got a trailer come out, which didn't really show much, but it did show the artwork, the launch date of October 28th, which is pretty standard for Call of Duty on this point, as well as tease a date in June of when we can expect more information. Now, this is the day before the Summer Games Fest, so hopefully it's not just some minor tease of basically nothing and we don't get any information. I mean, really, if it's going to be on the Summer Games Fest, I'd at least want some kind of gameplay, but let's face it, in the current climate of gaming, they seem to leave gameplay out until 2 days before launch, so I'm not sure I'm going to get that. But we should at least get some kind of teaser video, and this is out on June 8th. One thing I'm not a fan of is just a reveal that gives you the date of another reveal, and that's kind of what this one felt like. We didn't really get any big information. It was essentially just a bit of drone footage and then some artwork, and quite frankly, that's not enough to pique my interest. If you do a reveal and the main point of it seems to just be a later date, I think you've kind of failed at your marketing for me. But with all the talk about how Modern Warfare 2 is going to make a big impact on COD, it's going to be far more original and creative than the earlier ones were, I do want to find out what they're doing. Curious about their marketing. I just wish they'd get down to the part where they give us the information, rather than have to wait for various different people to leak it 3 months before they actually just confirm it's true. Buyouts across the gaming industry have been really insane recently. It started way back when Microsoft purchased Bethesda, then Activision, Blizzard, Sony started purchasing Bungie, and then everyone was after it. Ubisoft was putting themselves out there at one point, although simultaneously saying they weren't. But the strangest one that I've seen so far is that of EA. Because with recent reports of EA looking to sell or merge, it's actually not a new thing, considering they've been trying to sell themselves for a while. Not only have they actually tried to merge with NBC Universal, but they've also had talks with Disney, Apple, and various different other companies just to try and get bought out. When you go out and shop yourself around to that many companies, there's almost a sort of desperation to it, which seems particularly weird when you realize that EA themselves has actually spent $5 billion over the last year buying up studios of their own, and yet now they're trying to get that off onto other people. It doesn't really reek of self-confidence to me. But the strangest part is, despite having conversations with Disney, Apple, and Amazon, people have said that EA is primarily interested in a merger arrangement that would allow Wilson to remain as CEO of the combined company. That sounds like one hell of a deal for Wilson, but not really of anyone else. Yeah, I built up this company, I bought a load of stuff, and then something happened which made me think that I just had to get bought out. Although, when you give me all of the money, obviously, I want to remain in control of it. What? And the deals seem to be getting pretty complex because they're going to do a deal with NBC Universal, but that also involves spinning off a different company with EA while leaving Wilson in charge of it. It seems like the most bizarre way to end up with just another EA under a different name I've ever heard of, personally. And I can't help wondering why, because it doesn't seem like they're coming from a position of strength no matter what EA say. And as the article says, they're doing this as they've lost some of their biggest existing licensing deals, because while they've got 3 Star Wars games currently in production, its exclusivity deal with Disney for the Star Wars license isn't going to be renewed when it comes to 2023. And we've known this for a long time, because while it is a 10-year deal, actually Disney haven't been interested in renewing it for a while, and this is likely because the situation was messy, confusing, and frustrating. There was no plethora of projects, there was no multitude of genres, and overall very little investment into the actual IPs. I remember a time in the late 90s, early 2000s where Star Wars games were everywhere, and many of them were good. But since EA has gained exclusivity over it, they really didn't seem to do that much with it. And what they did, let's face it, weren't generally very good. And then you combine this with also their FIFA loss, where they've actually lost the exclusivity deal from that, and while as it says they are profitable for another year, they've also just laid off 200 extra employees as well. It's an odd situation to have a company laying off employees, being profitable, spending $5 billion to actually expand, and then for some reason desperately go around and shop themselves out to wherever it'll take them, all the while wanting to keep the CEO for some reason. If someone's that desperate to sell, you wouldn't generally want to keep the captain of the ship on board so he can sink the next one. But overall, this consolidation of gaming companies, I'm not really for. I like different people with different talents and different studios making their own IPs, being creative in those ways. And as everything consolidates under one kind of company or one banner, I think overall that will inevitably lead to less creativity, less varied games, less willing to take chances on things. We've seen that when they get a successful IP, they'll make 27 versions of that game and run it into the ground. That's what massive companies do. Whereas smaller indie companies are more willing to take chances. And I think it's those chances at great quality games we're going to lose under this consolidation effect of just a few companies buying everything. So personally, I didn't mind it at first, but I never expected it to go this far, this fast, with everybody, even major companies, wanting to be bought up by even bigger fish. And quite frankly, at this point, I'd like a little break. Marvel hasn't exactly had the best of luck when it comes to gaming recently, and that bad luck is going to continue considering the Marvel MMO from the Matrix Online developers has been cancelled. This is a project by Daybreak Games. EG7 announced that the development risk profile, size of investment, and long-term project portfolio strategy for the group as major reasons for the cancellations. In other words, it's going to cost too much, we don't have the developers to do it, and even if we released it, we think it would fail. And there's a lot of reasons to suggest that that is absolutely correct. When you look at the Guardians of the Galaxy game that we've just come out, apparently for Square Enix that was incredibly disappointing sales, which did indeed fall below expectations. And then you've got the Avengers game. This was a game that cost $100 million to produce and only sold 3 million copies, resulting in a net loss of $63 million according to analyst David Gibson. When you're looking at those numbers, a 63% loss of investment, you can understand why EG7 don't want to spend $50 million on the Marvel MMO over the next 3 years. MMOs are well known to be difficult to get off the ground, to get the players to move over, because yeah, well, they might be big hits at first. Very quickly they realize, hang on, I've got 2,000 hours in this other MMO, I'm just gonna go back and play that. And that all adds up to one hell of a development risk profile. It would have been interesting to find out how far along they were into the project, but if they were planning on spending 500 million Swedish kroner on it, and that's $50 million, we do know that they're going to write down 233 million kroner in project-related assets in Q2, which equals, what, like 22 or $23 million worth. So this is a project that was actually quite well advanced, or at least it had a lot of money sunk into it. Letting a game go down where you've already spent $22 million on it is not an easy decision, I'm sure. And it's going to be interesting to see if they can use any of those assets for other projects, similar to what turned into Overwatch from the Blizzard MMO. Blizzard were creating their next big MMO, cancelled it, and then turned those assets into an FPS, and that became Overwatch. So if EG7 can do that, then maybe all of these assets and all of this money won't completely go to waste. Otherwise, that's one hell of a hit to take. And you can only imagine the state that game must have been in for them to actually have made this decision. Because I can only really see two options. Either they played the game and it just wasn't fun, or they looked at Disney and Marvel at the current state of affairs and thought, there's no way we are going to sink more money into that sinking ship. But the outlook for Marvel games isn't looking too peachy right now. And for the other projects that are there, those developers must be a little bit worried, because they've all got these really expensive IPs, but no one seems to be able to make a success of the games they produce from them. The revamped PlayStation Plus is missing one major feature that people wanted, and that is day one AAA games from Sony. This is something that Xbox Game Pass has, and it's one of the reasons it has so many subscribers. And yet, one of the former Xbox executives say that that is exactly why Game Pass could be a threat to the gaming industry. Because he says that despite the fact that it offers exceptional value and is basically a no-brainer for people that actually want to play any of those games, it still makes him nervous, due to the fact that it could make people stop buying games altogether. And for this, he uses the analogy of Spotify, which he says has destroyed the music business. Now, I was under the impression that Spotify was a boon for the music industry, because back in the days, piracy was such a major thing for music, and now it's kind of been eliminated entirely. But he says that Spotify essentially cut the annual revenue of the music business in half, and it's just because people don't buy songs anymore. And so that while Game Pass may offer value for money, he says this may not be the best approach for the industry, as it could just stop people buying games. We have to be careful that we don't create the same system in the game business. I mean, these markets are more fragile than people realize. But for me, it all seems a little bit over-dramatic. Yes, Game Pass does inevitably stop people buying the games. This is because if you can pay for 1 month of subscription, play the game for a month, and then that's it, you don't need to buy the game anymore, obviously, that's a lost sale. The question is, how many of those sales would actually have happened? If you take the Halo single-player campaign, that's something I can get on Game Pass. Would I ever have bought that for $60 on its own? No. Rainbow Six Extraction. Was I ever going to pay for that on its own? No. Age of Empires 4? No. Back 4 Blood? Definitely not. Played it quite a lot on Xbox Game Pass though. Only for a month, got bored, stopped. These are games I played that I never would have bought otherwise. And I think the entire debate is also missing the fact that on Xbox Game Pass you can also sell DLC, which can actually make up for even more revenue than buying the game in the first place. So there's definitely alternative business models that can be used over there. But also, let's face it, his argument would only ever happen if every game was available on Xbox Game Pass, and that's never going to happen because it's made by so many other companies. This is strictly a Microsoft thing, and they get titles from other people when they can. And presumably those third-party titles also get some kind of payment when they go over there in the first place, and it's up to them what deals they make. This isn't a Spotify situation where everyone wants to go on Spotify. If you look up some music on Spotify, it's probably there. We're never going to get that with Xbox Game Pass, where you can just look up almost any game and they've got it. So I don't think at all we're actually in any danger of getting into a situation where Game Pass will stop people buying games altogether. I just can't see anything becoming that centralized. Well, not unless Microsoft start buying up every single game studio in the world. That actually seems like a possibility at this point, I guess. And let's face it, the gaming industry is not the music industry. Music, you can sit in a room, use your voice, and away you go. It's actually pretty cheap to make a song if you just want a microphone and to sing. That isn't the case for a game which can take $10 million, $20 million, or $100 in some case, like it did with the Avengers game I mentioned earlier. These costs alone will inevitably put the brakes on any kind of scheme of centralization like that, because the game simply couldn't afford to be made under that subscription model. So for me, I'm not that worried that his fears will ever come to light. I just don't see how they ever could in the real world. But let me know your thoughts down in the comments below about this or any of the other previous topics. Like the video if you like the video, subscribe for more videos like this in the future, and I will see you in the next one. Bye-bye.